An Australia-wide hunt is continuing for the Victoria Club bandits, so far without success. Official estimates still put the haul at $1.5 million, but there are many in Melbourne who now say the figure could be as high as $5 million.
Raymond Patrick Bennett was born into a poor family in Chiltern, country Victoria, in 1949.
He became a painter and docker at 14, and he was moving around with some of the most significant criminals in Melbourne at the time. He was watching them and learning from them.
Aged 20, Bennett met the love of his life, Gail Petrie. Young and madly in love, Gail had no idea of Ray's criminal history.
In Gail's circumstance, it only became known to her after they married. So there's love there, and there's this very strong bond. She's not going to judge her husband for what he does from that point.
Ignorance may well have been bliss for Gail Petrie, especially after the money came rolling in.
In the 60s and 70s, we were at a zenith for armed robbery. I think the 70s was the biggest armed robbery decade in the whole of Australia.
Bennett's heist in 1976 topped the lot for its ingenuity and audacity. Ray Bennett, with a team of 5 others, attacked the Victorian Club in downtown Melbourne and relieved bookies of their Easter weekend takings. A haul later estimated at $15 million or $90 million in today's money. Other gangs had wanted to rob the bookies, but it had been largely dismissed as impossible. It took the criminal mastermind Ray Bennett to choreograph such a complex heist.
The idea was to secure the premises, no one gets in, no one gets out. The Great Bookie Robbery itself would be over in minutes, but the planning involved not just getting in, but also how to get out without attracting a lot of attention.
It involved a military-style fitness regime, visits to the club to tamper with the lift to reduce suspicion when it was out of order during the heist. And they filed down the bolts on the doors to the fire escape so that it could easily be kicked in.
On the day of the robbery, the men waited, balaclavaed, for the armoured van to arrive with all the bookie bags containing cash. When the bags arrived on the second floor, the robbers burst through the door. Only 2 of them spoke. Of the 2 men that spoke, one was Ray. The other man said, "Get down, everybody get down." One of the men left the second floor and secured the front door of the building. He controlled the stairs from there. Once they had the cash, they actually took it upstairs to an office that they had leased. They didn't go back for it and get their money for a month. From that point, they simply walked out through the front door, and all 6 men joined up later that day for lunch in a pub in South Melbourne to celebrate their success.
Any part of that amount of money would have been an attractive bait for anyone, because once he'd obtained the money, it would have been easier for them to steal it from him than to steal it from the original source of where the funds were stored.
The huge prize was expected to attract the attention of the infamous toe cutter gang. They were renowned for persuading armed robbers to hand over their loot, sometimes by lopping off toes or applying a blowtorch.
Now, they were a rough bunch of guys linked to the IRA, but they looked at Ray Bennett and his gang in Melbourne and they decided that that was a war they would rather not fight. So the toe cutters stayed away, and to the degree that Ray Bennett was extorted or had money extorted from him rests essentially with Les and Brian Kane.
The Kane brothers were members of the Painters and Dockers Union and had ferocious reputations.
The 2 of them would always front up, collect money, and they used to show a lot of violence. And they'd jump all over your head, you know, to collect $300 or $400, you know, and they used to break your legs and break your arms.
The bad blood began in a suburban hotel. During a brawl, a Bennett gang member bit off part of Brian Kane's ear. In retaliation, Les Kane declared war and threatened Bennett's family.
There were a number of rules being broken at the time. The main rule is that you don't involve families. But when Les Cain had threatened Ray Bennett's family, Ray Bennett thought, well, OK, the gloves are off.
Bennett decided a preemptive surprise attack on Les Cain would solve his problems.
Police say Leslie Cain, a former painter and docker, was murdered in his Swan-Turner home, but his body was never found. 3 men were charged with Leslie Cain's murder: Lawrence Prendergast, Vincent Mickelson, and this man, Raymond Chuck Bennett.
There are a couple of different versions of this. The gang had actually infiltrated into Cain's house. They had watched Les Cain come in. They watched him as he put his gun in the medicine cabinet, ready to have a shower or something. They leapt out, grabbed him, shot him with several automatic weapons. His wife and kids were on hand at the time. The gang bundled his body into the back of his own Ford, and Les nor the car were ever seen again.
The fact that they did it in front of his wife and kids was, you just couldn't forgive that kind of thing.
Crossing that line sent a clear message to the underworld to stay away. The message was well and truly received. The loot was safe, but for Bennett, it wasn't enough.
One of the toughest detectives of his generation, Brian Murphy, said that Ray Chuck Bennett was the only one he actually feared.
Brian Murphy first met Ray Bennett in the late 70s when he was sent to search Bennett's home for stolen goods. When police arrived, only his wife Gail and son were at home. Gail alleged that during the search, Murphy picked up her son and threw him onto a bed.
She was on one side of the bed and I've walked to the end of the bed, and diagonally, if you cut the corner off at a 45-degree angle, I passed the baby over to her. A little fellow, he's about 3, I think. And everything was all right. And because once she was upset, she was in full flight. So I got out. And that was the last of it until later that evening, he and another bloke visited us where at the corner of the Victoria Pizza Parlour.
Bennett believed Murphy had used unnecessary force with his son. As far as he was concerned, Murphy had to go.
That Friday night, myself and several other detectives went over to have a pizza at West Melbourne. We were met by Bennett and another friend of his, who was well known to me, and Bennett opened the conversation. He's still throwing little babies across bedrooms. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, you do know what I'm talking about. I said, well, if you think that, you can get because I haven't done it. One word led to another, and he and his mate took off. I said to my mate, have you got your gun on you? He said, no. I said, well, I haven't got mine. You go back and get it. And I just had a bad feeling about it. He hopped in the car and brought our guns back. I said, listen, if they throw a grenade or some explosive through that bloody window, we're all gone. I said, I'm not sitting in here. So I went outside. I was standing at the front, and he pulled up with another guy, and they flipped the boot open, and Chuck produced a pump-action shotgun. Well, as that took place, there's a half a dozen fellows walked around from the market and came into the pizza parlour, which buggered up his view. You could see he was furious. He knew that too many witnesses there, and he slammed the boot of the car down and they took off.
2 days later, Bennett and his wife were brought in for questioning over the incident. When officers left the room, Bennett was overheard asking his wife to destroy evidence. In what would be the last time the two men would speak, the skull took the chair opposite his adversary.
There were other policemen around, but I was to interview him. I said, but if you want to sort it out here and now, and sort out what took place on that Friday, last Friday, in relation to your wife and your child, I said, we can do it here. He says, no, what you did is wrong. He said, and I'm going to kill you.
Murphy wasn't the only policeman who wanted Bennett behind bars. He was still a key suspect in the murder of Les Cain.
Ray Bennett and 2 other men were charged with the murder of Les Cain. All 3 were acquitted at trial. The other 2 men went into hiding, but Ray Bennett had an outstanding matter, an armed payroll, and he was remanded.
Bennett would have been prepared for retribution within prison walls, but not in a courthouse.
Raymond Patrick Bennett was gunned down in the corridors of the courthouse as he was being led to the 10th court to face armed robbery charges. The killer stood at the top of a flight of stairs and fired 3 shots, hitting Bennett twice in the chest and in one of his hands. As the killer calmly turned and went down the back stairs of the court, Bennett reeled backwards and ran into a courtyard where he collapsed in a pool of blood. The police officers escorting him, after being warned by the killer not to follow, chased Bennett, believing he was trying to escape.
Talk me through what happened after Ray Bennett was shot dead.
That morning we were, myself and another member, we've driven up to the entrance of the police garage. One of the blokes said, "Oh, your mate's just been knocked." I said, "Who?" He said, "Chuck." I said, "You're joking." He said, "No." I said, "When?" He said, "Oh, about 5 minutes ago." So I said, "Fair enough."
Now there are allegations that the killer was in fact a police officer. I was told about those allegations by high-ranking police officers. I was also told that the Police Internal Investigation Squad, B11, is conducting investigations into 2 police officers in connection with the Bennett slaying.
The allegation of a policeman being the shooter was dropped and the real identity of the killer was revealed.
There is no doubt that Brian Cain murdered Ray Bennett. There is speculation that Brian Cain received assistance from corrupt police in order to leave the scene as quickly as he did and not be captured, but we'll never really know about that.